Greetings, welcome, and thank you for joining us for part two of our three-part talk series, Wisdom versus Intelligence. My name is Gallery Coe, and I'm the founder of Cosmos Institute. Earlier this year, it suddenly became critical for me to take a definitive stance on the AI situation, both as a person and as a purveyor of a growing educational platform. Having conducted a few years of independent research on the various phenomena surrounding AI and social media platforms, I decided that so long as these rogue technologies are running amok in our world without the security of intelligent oversight and regulation, that I would none of it, to use Shakespearean negation language. While I certainly appreciate the benefits of technological advances, I also feel that as a species, we currently lack sufficient humility and wisdom to utilize these powerful technologies in non-destructive ways. There's no question in my mind that we are at a momentous crossroads witnessing a great shift in what we call reality. As I have my own rather strong views on these matters, I asked a few of my favorite professors to help me and the Cosmos Institute community gain more clarity so each of us can mull things over for ourselves and decide what's what. For years, Keiron Le Grice has represented an archetypal pattern of discipline, honor, and scholarly profundity for me. Besides serving as a chair of my dissertation committee and helping me successfully complete my PhD, he has become a model professor whose wisdom and careful guidance have shaped my evolution as a scholar and professional in the field of depth psychology. Dr. Keiron Le Grice is a professor of depth psychology and the co-chair in the Jungian and Archetypal Studies specialization at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and honorary lecturer at the University of Essex. He is the author of several books, including the multi-volume The Way of the Archetypes, The Archetypal Cosmos, The Rebirth of the Hero, and The Lion Will Become Man. The founder of ITAS Publications, co-founder of Archi, the Journal of Archetypal Cosmology, and co-editor of Jung and Astrology, Keiron's work has been instrumental in the development of the field of archetypal cosmology. He was the 2023 SAP Zurich Lecture Series speaker and has also taught for CIIS, the Aleph Trust, and Graph Transpersonal Training. Please welcome Dr. Keiron Le Grice.
Gallery, thanks so much for that lovely introduction. Very, very generous. I appreciate it. I'm still seeing myself not on speaker, so I don't know um, if I need to change the view, multi-speaker. That's okay. That's fine. Well, hello, welcome everyone. As Gallery said, I'm Keiron Le Grice. I'm going to be speaking to you today about AI, which is not a topic I am myself expert in. I think probably like you, I follow along all the news and I look with interest and sometimes with alarm at the direction things are going and the way that AI seems to be, on the one hand, championed as the cure to all ills, but on the other hand, you see apocalyptic scenarios imagined in the context of AI. So we're faced with these somewhat polar extremes as to where it might lead us. Now, my concern is not so much the world that AI will deliver us to and how that might impact our lives, rather on the side of wisdom, perhaps, rather than artificial intelligence. I am interested in an alternative way to be in the world, an alternative way to meet life, to orient ourselves toward life that's in keeping with our spiritual nature. Um, and I think that's something that is increasingly jeopardized, not least by the rise of AI. So I'm going to talk you through, I guess the first half of my talk will be more on the negative diagnosis of the problems posed by AI. And then the second half, or maybe a little more, I'll focus on a largely Jungian, but more broadly spiritual approach to life that presents itself as an alternative. So I'll share my screen. I plan to speak for about an hour, and then we can open it up for discussion at the end. Okay, just let me move my little images around. Okay, so here's the blurb, which I just read back to myself, and I realized it is quite negative in some respects. Those of you that know astrology, perhaps some of you here will know that we're in the midst of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in the sky. And I'm going to say a little bit more about astrology right at the end, but it archetypally it inclines towards a negative vision. But it also inclines towards seeing through illusion to the truth of things. And I think both of those themes are evident here. So I'm just going to read the blurb to kind of set the stage, and then I'll unpack some of the details as we go along. So the transrational order, pathways to spirit in an era of scientism, technocracy, and AI. The rapid acceleration of the development of AI has coincided with the rise of increasingly technocratic governance, censorship, and surveillance, furnishing those in authority, political, economic, and cultural, with immense power to control and manipulate human behavior for its own ends. Science, operating within a materialistic and reductionist paradigm, is lauded as the ultimate arbiter of truth, and, in the eyes of many, has replaced religion as the guiding force of human existence. We now turn to technology and pharmaceuticals to combat all human ills, with AI threatening to deprive us of individual autonomy and even remove the need for independent thinking and willing. Are we destined, therefore, to become nothing more than technologically and pharmaceutically controlled experience machines under the control of one or other political regime? In this dystopian scenario, what are the possibilities and prospects for a spiritual life? How might those of us alarmed or perhaps horrified by the direction of the world find sustaining life meaning and orientation? So my lens is partly on AI, but partly on the broader world situation that we find ourselves in today. I think the two are inseparable. I wanted to look, first of all, at the historical background in brief. And I think we can go back at least to the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution to see the origins of where we are now. And these two movements, which are overlapping in many ways, champion the rise of reason and rationality in the case of the Enlightenment and scientific empiricism in the case of the scientific revolution. Um, I'm looking at maybe around Copernicus in the 1500s as the beginning of this era. And since that time, increasingly there's been a shift away from any kind of religious worldview, chiefly, of course, in the West. That's Christianity. The Christian world picture has been deconstructed, dismantled by our commitment to skeptical reason, doubting skeptical reason, which doubts the faith-based revelations of the Bible, and the scientific mindset, scientific discovery, whether it's Copernicus or Darwin or later Freud, the whole Christian world picture has been shattered, and it set us on this course towards increasing scientific and technological and rational advancement. In many ways, that is liberating. It's liberating. It's proved to be the bedrock of democratic society, individualism, the high ideals of the Enlightenment. So I don't see this as a negative development outright. However, it has had, and it does have some challenging implications, not least, I think, because it's not like we act solely out of a pure, unadulterated, unblemished reason that just sees into the truth of things. Rather, it's reason unconsciously dominated by a will to power. The scientific endeavor, the scientific enterprise is in service of this will to often dominate, control, and thereby transform nature and transform ourselves in the process. Romanticism, which again, the approximate dates perhaps from the 17th century onward through the 19th, through to about the 19th century. Romanticism, in many ways, is a compensatory counterpart to the Enlightenment. So, whereas the Enlightenment championed reason, Romanticism focused on the irrational rather than the rational, the irrational. And this fed into depth psychology. If you look there at the concerns of Romanticism, feeling, passion, intuition, imagination, the will, suffering, beauty, the supernatural, metaphysical, the depths, mystery, and heroic individualism. Many of those things became the central focuses of depth psychology, particularly the depth psychology associated with Carl Jung. And yet, Jungian psychology drew and draws on Enlightenment rationality. It draws on science. Jung approached these topics, these themes, these dimensions of life in the spirit of science. So it's not that these different movements are radically separate. So just as the irrational, the concern of romanticism, kind of takes hold of the rational and drives the scientific enterprise, so science, skillfully applied, can illuminate the irrational depths and darkness and background of human experience. I think the chief negative to come out of these developments, at least in my view, is scientism. And that's where science, it's like science overdone. Science that becomes like a creed, an ideology, a belief system. And this is what is meant by scientism. And I think we can see that especially in recent times. If you think about the COVID era and the way that I think for the first time people turned to science as the source of salvation rather than to God, or perhaps even exclusively to science. You know, trust the science, follow the science. That was the narrative, and we all look to science to deliver us, to bring forth the cures and deliver us from the COVID pandemic. Um, but I think science overdone is a danger, and science overdone has led us to the emergence of AI and the faith that the blind faith I think that people put in AI to deliver us to a brave new world. Okay. Now, at the risk of stating the obvious, I've created a list of things that are lacking in artificial intelligence. And I felt that I should create such a list because when I see news stories and television reports and so forth on AI, people seem to assign to it more power, more reality than I think it actually has. And that's not to underestimate the power of AI to transform things, but much of AI, it seems to me, an imitation of human qualities and capabilities rather than the genuine capacity to be something human-like. And again, this seems to me an obvious truth, but I think it's one worth stating. Artificial intelligence is lacking in these human qualities, I would say. It doesn't really feel. There is no feeling. Evidently, in a computer that's driven by algorithms, there is no feeling there. There's no. You need to have an embodied, sentient, self-aware being to feel, and AI clearly is not that. It doesn't desire. It doesn't have will. I think will and desire go hand in hand. It could be programmed towards certain ends, but in itself, it doesn't desire one thing over another because that is tied into feeling, right? And preferring one state of things to another, preferring happiness, pleasure to pain, trying to avoid suffering. It doesn't have consciousness. Consciousness, of course, is a great mystery. We don't know how we become aware of the world. But there's no genuine self-reflective consciousness in AI. It's rather pattern recognition. It can match data sets and appear to then perceive, but there is no real perception. It doesn't think. It computes. It doesn't think in the way that we humans think. There is no personhood. There is no selfhood. I was on I do make use of a chat GPT from time to time, kind of partly to satisfy my curiosity. And I was on there the other day and I asked something on chat GPT, and having received an answer, it then said, I can help you with this, that, and the other. I can expand on these certain points. So chat GPT has been coded to reference I, even though there's no selfhood there. There is no person, obviously. So again, there's a kind of illusion here that is being perpetuated by the way we've come to see AI and the way it's actually being set up by developers. And I think that that is a little dangerous. The danger being that we can blur the boundaries between reality and illusion in our own lives for ourselves. There's no imagination in AI. AI can generate artistic output, but it doesn't flow out of the genuine imaginative revelation of what it is to be alive and the revelation of the world. There's no aesthetic sense, even though AI can be coded to or can teach itself through coding to produce images that are visually pleasing, that I have no doubt, and to replicate other works of art, human works of art, it doesn't have that capacity to look at a painting and feel moved and feel pleasure and feel a sense of rightness at the arrangement of forms and colors. It doesn't harbor or aspire to ideals. Um, that and the quest for an ideal, the um, subservience to an ideal, the sacrifice to an ideal, these are deeply human things. They're tied to the religious sense of life. They're tied to the spiritual. Stating the obvious again, I think, but these things are lacking in AI. There is perception, evidently, but there is no, I would say, genuine perception. I am I don't have a background in AI, as I said, but when I was an undergrad at university in the University of Leeds in England. I Initially my major was going to be accountancy and finance, and so I was 18, but it was right at the time of my spiritual awakening, and I pretty soon realized that that wasn't the right path for me. And so it was about 6 weeks into the first term, and I was going to quit, drop out, and come back the next year and do something more interesting. But just as I was leaving campus, determined to quit, I bumped into this girl I knew, and she said, "Oh, I've just signed up for a new program called Cognitive Science." And I was like, "Well, that sounds kind of interesting." And it was philosophy, psychology, and computing, and part of the computing was AI, right? And so, rather than quit, I ended up transferring to that program. So I ended up studying AI for my first year at university, and I remember we were in a little tutorial. We had to gather around an old, this was 1991, so it was like an old box-like computer. And it was one of the first AI programs, and it was designed to be a psychotherapist. So you would like type things into the computer about your issues, and then the computer would respond. I mean, it was kind of lame, but it was early 90s, early days for AI. But it appeared to perceive, it appeared to recognize what you were saying, and I think this is still the same, but not really, because there's no one there. There's no perceiving consciousness. So too, humor. I think humor is a peculiarly a human thing, and again, AI can perhaps feign or pretend to be humorous and find things that humans find funny, but not genuinely spontaneously humorous. And not least, I think underlying all of these is there is no, to my mind, no spiritual essence, certainly no soul in something that is arises from bits and bytes, like algorithms and so forth. That's not to say that spiritual essence is limited to the human. I don't think it is. But there's something grossly lacking, obviously, in AI in that respect. So my summary there, the output of AI appears similar to human traits, but there is no interiority. It is akin to a black box approach to understanding human life. Now, the black box approach, as many of you will know, I am sure, um, comes from behaviorism. The psychology of behaviorism, popular in the 1950s, came out of Pavlov and Watson and Skinner. Um, and the black box behavioral approach to psychology basically ignores human interiority. It looks at what goes in, the stimulus, and looks at what comes out, the response, but it brackets or even denies the reality of any kind of interior self or consciousness. It's a science of behavior, quite literally. And that's one of the ways that psychology is still defined, such was the influence of behaviorism at the time. Okay, I want to mention one thing that I think will help to drive this home, particularly the lack of desire and will in AI. So there's something in philosophy, for those of you that have studied it, this will be familiar, but something called the fact value distinction. And it's similar to another distinction called the is ought. And I'll give you an example. So if you're standing in a house and you see that the house is on fire, that's a fact. That's the fact. The house is on fire. You're going to burn if you don't leave the house. But you would only leave the house if because you value your life and you don't want to die. You desire to stay alive, right? So the fact in itself is not enough to lead to behavior. There's no evaluation based on you as a sentient being desiring to stay alive, to avoid suffering, and so on. The is ought, likewise, the house is on fire, but you only ought to leave because you want to stay alive. And I think the on the value ought side, that is where AI is lacking because AI deals in facts, data, information. But what is its end? What is its desire? Where do its values come from? I think the values of AI can only come from its originators, its creators, its developers, that give it a certain value or give it the capacity to try to find and adopt values as it learns, as it accumulates its capacity for knowledge. But somewhere that initial orientation towards a value needs to be given to it because it can't arise out of um, something that doesn't possess innately feeling and desire. So my summary there, AI can only reflect the will of its creators or can be coded to act as if it wills or confirm or conforms to a hierarchy of values. I just want to go through now some, um, I guess, quite obvious threats that AI poses. I'm going to then, in a moment, contrast a life that is um, guided, instructed by an AI kind of attitude, as opposed to a life that is guided from a sense of inner wisdom. And I think that's what this series of lectures is chiefly concerned with. Okay, threats. There's a danger in the leap of AI to autonomy if it functions according to the ideological values of developers and or assimilates the dominant ideological values of the time. Because if you think about the values of our time, they are not really in any way spiritual. We live in an age of atheism, nihilism, materialism, consumerism, secularism, where scientism, is the ultimate arbiter of what is true and what is valuable. So those of us who are seeking a deeper kind of truth, a deeper kind of reality, are going to be susceptible to AI's implicit assumptions about reality, if I can even say it in those terms, because it's just going to draw from the consensus worldview. It's going to draw from the dominant worldview, the data that is out there, on Wikipedia or Encyclopedia Britannica or whatever source it might be that it pulls from the internet or digitally available published work. The society is saturated by these paradigmatic biases that those of us who have been exposed to the spiritual side of life know to be, if in some cases, untrue, and in many cases, limited. So I think that that is a danger, and it's one that I don't see really stated very clearly. And to put that in a slightly different way, there's a danger in unconscious human values manifesting through the immense controlling power of AI, because this is an immensely powerful tool, and yet it's going to be unconsciously subservient and constrained by this implicit set of values that in many ways are counter to our spiritual nature. Another danger is that we abdicate decision making to AI algorithms becoming subservient to collective knowledge and values, as kind of a follow on from the point I was just making. I mean, it certainly doesn't appeal to me to have AI direct my life and to have a chatbot friend or even a kind of AI therapist. Remembering my experience in the early 90s. But it's clearly some people are invested in this, or at least interested and open to this possibility. And we live in a epidemic of loneliness, and people don't necessarily have human companionship. So you can see the danger here and the attraction of that in some ways. A further major threat is the use of AI as a mechanism of political control in league with the ruling scientific paradigms. And this is kind of where I was going in my blurb. Um, Particularly if you think about other recent developments in the UK, my own country where I am right now, they've just announced a rolling out of digital ID cards, and there's the real ID in the US, or at least in California. Other countries already have or are investing in digital ID cards. We live in an increasingly in a society that's increasingly subject to surveillance. Every corner, every turn, every store you go in, your facial recognition camera. I mean, it's just like out of control, I think, in many ways. And then there's the deeply troubling prospect, I think, of having a kind of social credit scoring. I've seen many articles along these lines, some perhaps scaremongering, but some raising genuine points, where you have a system of behavioral reward and punishment for, again, going back to behaviorism, depending on how you live and how much you drive and so forth. And I appreciate, of course, the larger ecological concerns of our time and the need for people to watch their carbon footprint and such like. But there is a danger if you start to put these things together that human beings can be subject to this tyranny of a kind of matrix-like control that watches our every move, such that we can only live according to the agreed upon values and rules of the reigning political establishment, whichever side of the spectrum that might be on. It's a real threat to individual freedom, to individual integrity, spiritual integrity. And AI obviously furnishes those in power or those trying to influence us through commerce to buy products. It's an incredibly powerful tool to that end. So imposing restrictions and restraints on human liberty, as I said, Beyond Freedom and Dignity is the name of Skinner's famous book on behaviorism, came out in 1971, about a totally conditioned society that just disregards human freedom and dignity. And I think that that is a danger that AI could furnish us with that kind of power. I mentioned there also genetic manipulation, medical diagnoses and pharmaceutical interventions, further expressions of scientism that is ignorant of or willfully blind to our deeper spiritual nature. An example of this would be the COVID era. Now, if you imagine COVID were to happen, perish the thought, but COVID were to happen like in 2 years' time, or 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, how much more power would governments of the world have to control individuals along these lines with digital ID cards, with a surveillance system, with AI, um, computing behind everything? I mean, it could be an almost totalitarian system of control, which even if it's well intended, which I think in most cases COVID measures were. I like to believe they were well intended, but because they're subject to the limiting materialistic worldview and narrow scientific paradigms, reductionism and atomism and so forth, it's necessarily threatening to individual freedom. And individual freedom has to be rooted in something deeper, a spiritual source. So I end this section with a little mention of statistical man, which is a term that Jung used, Carl Jung. Um, he was making the point that if you view everything through statistics, which I think AI would be inclined to do, computing general truths, you miss the individuality. Jung said something like, if you might know the average weight of every pebble on the beach, but that doesn't tell you anything about any particular individual pebble. And I think something like that applies to human experience too. We're not statistical units. We have our individual integrity, or it should be grounded in something deeper, deep within us, a transcendent, Jung said, an extra mundane source, something that lifts us out of our mundane reality, some deeper awareness of spiritual essence, spiritual ground, spiritual truth. That, at least, is my take on this. Okay, so in that spirit, I wish to present an alternative strategy for meeting life. How then can we orient our lives? I ask, how can we make decisions? How can we find a spiritual path through life in such an adverse climate? Now, again, before covering these points, I don't want to tar AI with a wholly negative brush. All technology has positive and negative consequences, and all technology that's come into being has remained in being. It's not like I think we can avoid the further development of AI. It could be regulated, and I know people have made noises in that direction, and surely that would be a good thing. But I think we have to accept that this reality is upon us and it's going to be a dominant shaping force in the years ahead. Therefore, I think it's especially important for us to have some counterpoint to that so that we can be anchored in our own spiritual truth, our own individual integrity. So here are my suggestions, drawing very liberally on Jung. We need to cultivate self-knowledge, and for Jung, that means facing the shadow. The shadow, in Jung's view, is the dark, hidden, unconscious, inferior half of the personality. Maybe more than half. It's the unconscious. Only by facing the shadow can we come to terms with the whole person that we really are, our potential for greatness, for goodness, our capacity for evil, um, the highs and the lows, the farther reaches of our character. And this is essential, Jung felt, that we have to have the moral courage to face the shadow. If we do that, and moving quite quickly through these. If we do that, we can then start to differentiate a word that's often used in depth psychology, Jungian psychology, differentiate the animus and anima. Now, the animus and anima are fairly well-known archetypes. The animus, quite simply, is on the side of ideas, logos, beliefs, opinions, and anima is on the side of feeling, moods, and so forth. So, in Jung's view, we need to become free of the unconscious domination of these archetypes. Now, if we can differentiate the animus, that means coming to understand what we ourselves really believe to be true, and in so doing, thereby emancipating ourselves from collective opinion, the dominant ideas of the day, the consensus worldview, rather than just be unconsciously swayed by ideas that are not our own, that come to us, that might appear persuasive and compelling. Rather than that, if we differentiate the animus, if we ask ourselves, what is it we really believe? What do I think is true? What do I know to be true based on my own experience? If we can do that kind of inner dialogue, inner investigation, we can start to progressively grow free of the ideas that keep the blinders to our true nature and to the nature of the world. So that's the animus. And then equally, in a similar, proceeding in a similar way, we can ask ourselves, what do I really feel? What do I really feel rather than an unconscious anima in when that is dominant, we would be subject to irrational moods, irrational feelings, eros as desire, like blinded by our desire for one thing, our desire for another thing, living in a kind of Maya-like veiled, obscured world because we're so lost in our emotional reactions. And many of our emotional reactions are just like spontaneous triggers, and they don't represent what we truly feel. So to truly feel is to differentiate the anima, and it's to ask ourselves, what do I really feel about something? So it's like a penetrating deeper into particular effects, emotions, desires that come over us, so that we start to feel in truly to those. Now, if we do that, if we do both of those things, differentiate the animus, come to terms with what it is we really think and believe, and differentiate the anima, what it is we really feel, that's that's a step towards realizing, recognizing our true nature. A differentiated anima on the feeling side allows you to feel into the rightness of things, like what is the right thing to do. So if you're decision making, if you're faced with a big decision in your life, and as we all are, I think life is awash with decisions these days, and so we're always burdened by decision. How do you make a decision? Well, ordinarily you might think, well, what do I want? Right? What do I want? And how can I get from where I am now, point A, to where I want to be, point B? And so there's a kind of strategic mind, a rational mind. You look at all the factors, you look at your life circumstance, and these things are all essential. But there is another way to orient oneself to life, and that is through one's own deep connection to the whole. Now, Jung's view is that the anima, if differentiated, is like the voice of the soul. Like the anima is the soul, but it's also eros, desire, and it has a Dionysian element. And so you've got to work to get to the soul part. So when you've done that, the anima feeling allows us to think, to feel what is the right thing to do here. And it becomes like another function that exists alongside reason and strategy and willpower and merely desiring one thing or over another. And again, those things are all necessary, but the anima in some ways allows us to transcend the computation of different permutations, right, and possibilities, which AI could help us with. It could, give us like, okay, what do I need to do if I want to create a business, or I want to do this, or I want to do that? You would get a ton of information back, data information. But how do you choose what is right for you as an individual? Well, the differentiation of the anima allows that feeling function to guide in a kind of intuitive way. So you get a feel for what it is you must do. What is the next step that I must take? I remember that Marie-Louise von Franz, who was perhaps Jung's foremost collaborator and student, she said these days, people get a funny feeling in the stomach that things aren't quite right. They just think, oh, it's a stomach ache, and take a tablet to get rid of the stomach ache, rather than pay attention. Why do things not feel right? I figured everything out, and this is what I think I should do, and it makes sense to me, and it's rational and it makes common sense, but it doesn't feel right. And so that's where the anima function comes in. And I think increasingly those of us who want to operate outside of the control, the web of AI, information, data, algorithms, and so forth, will need to cultivate this kind of felt connection. Because Jung's view is that that felt connection is not just you, not just coming from you personally as a human subject, as an individual, but it's also a connection to the whole. The anima feeling gives birth to the child in a kind of archetypal lineage, and the child is an impending symbol of the self. Now, for Jung, the self is often written with a capital S, is like the archetypal principle of the wholeness of things, the totality. And it's the totality in you and in me and in everything. So if we can connect to our self, the self within us, it connects us to the self in everything. And for Jung, the self is like God. Like he said, an experience of the self is phenomenologically indistinguishable from an experience of God. Right. So, he was very empirical and cautious in the way he said things, but the self is like God within, like, or the spirit within, or the Tao within. He said, the self is not only in me, but in all beings, like Atman, like Tao, right? And so if you can, through through the intellect and coming to understand what it is you really think and believe, animus, logos, and through feeling, soul, what it is you really, really, truly feel and what feels right. If you can develop those functions, it can put you in touch with the self and therefore the wholeness of things, right? A very mundane example would be you're driving in the car, and these days, like, you can turn on the GPS and it's going to tell you where to go, and it's going to give you three different routes, and you can pick the quickest one or the most economical one in terms of fuel or whatnot. And I don't know about you, but when I get in the car, I think, today I want to go this way, and I don't know why I want to go this way, and I look at the phone and it's like 10 minutes longer, and I think, but so normally now, I will, so I kind of follow the phone. I think, well, there must be like a traffic holdup or something. So I follow the phone, and then something happens along the way and it gets all gridlocked. And I think, I wish I'd followed my feeling to go the way I wanted to go. And why will you be drawn to one direction over another at any one time? It's irrational, right? It's an irrational thing. But Jung said there's something strangely mysterious and true. I'm paraphrasing quite clumsily. Young clings to the anima, and he called this like higher logic, like a higher wisdom, a higher truth, the archetype of the spirit. And the most prominent form of the archetype of the spirit that we would all recognize is the wise old man, like a Gandalf or a Yoda in film, that kind of figure. But Jung believed that these are not just mythic figures we might see in literature and in film, but there's a wise old man, or like a fairy godmother, or a crone, or a helpful animal type spirit and function within each of us. And if we can get through the shadow, then anima and animus, um, if we can differentiate those archetypes, face them, differentiate them, make them more conscious, we can then be in tune with that higher transrational order, which is what the wise old man archetype of the spirit represents. And these archetypes are all expressions of the self in some ways, satellites of the self. They are aspects of our larger being, right? Everything that we are. But they're unconscious. And while they're unconscious, we can't draw on them. We then are living as alienated egos and are more susceptible to being unconsciously dominated by things that we're not recognizing within ourselves, right? So the whole thrust of the Jungian individuation process is to try to bring the ego into relation with the self, and then the archetypes are functions in service of the self. So the archetype of the spirit, which you also calls the archetype of meaning, the wise old man, fairy godmother, and so on, is the our capacity to tune in to a superior wisdom that runs through life. And again, I'll give you another example. I think pretty much everyone will have seen Star Wars, at least one of the many films now. But if you think of the first one, the whole thing with the original 1977 one with Luke Skywalker fighting the Death Star, and you get this kind of numinous moment of Obi-Wan Kenobi telling Luke Skywalker to trust the Force, right? To trust the Force, to turn off the computer navigating system that he's going to use to blow up the Imperial Death Star, and just to follow feeling. And it makes no sense. Like you wouldn't do that, right? Because the computer can give you so much more accuracy than just a feeling, right? But somehow there's a truth there that through your feeling, you connect to the whole. And this kind of intuitive felt wisdom uh, transcends and allows us to live in a different way that is above and beyond what AI, even with its immense power to crunch data and give us information, it's beyond that. And so I feel that we need to lean into that kind of way of being in the world. I'm just going to say a couple more things from a Jungian perspective that kind of go hand in hand with that. Following dreams, right? Following dreams, following divination, by which I mean maybe like tarot, runes, I Ching, um, astrology, right? These are methods by which you can start to see your own blind spot. Dreams can allow you to see your own blind spot because they compensate, said Jung, for the limitation of our egoic subjective perspective, which is always limited. So there's a constant attempt on the part of the psyche to balance and to show the ego things that it hasn't seen. So if the ego's alienated and lost all meaning, then the compensation can be a big dream, like that reveals something important to you about your life path, what you must do. They're rare, but when they happen, we should pay attention to them, the big dreams, right? A divination can allow you to divine the meaning of the moment, right? To understand what are the different powers and themes and patterns at work archetypally, like at a high level that's saturating the universe and our experience at any given moment. The problem, I think, with divination is that it relies on our capacity for honest interpretation, right? And so, I don't know about you, but if I do a tarot reading, I kind of, I'm a little bit limited by what I want the outcome to be, right? And it takes something to kind of get yourself out of that expectation. And I think that interpretive bias is a challenge for using divination to help orient one's life. It's valuable, but I don't think in itself it is enough. Certainly need to retain critical reason and this your felt sense of what is the right thing to do and all these other factors. But divination can help to illuminate the meaning of the moment. Like, if it was the COVID era and you knew astrology, you could look at the astrology and see that at the start of COVID, there was a Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto conjunction. The three planets were together in the sky. And if you know what that means astrologically, it can give you a sense of this is awful, but I understand the archetypal reason. And it allows us to have a little bit more perspective and to bear suffering and challenge maybe a little more readily, willingly. And that's very important. Synchronicity, a complicated topic, and I'm actually going to be giving a course on this next spring. Gallery has kindly invited me back to do that, so I'm looking forward to that. So if you want to learn more, then join me for that longer, much longer format. But for here, a synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, things that happen to us, like you pull a book from the shelf and open it, and it just explains the thing that you've been struggling with for like 2 months, and like you're in a quandary, and you turn on the TV and there's a talk show that's addressing the thing that you need to hear, or someone speaks in a certain uncanny way, like and the words penetrate to you just at the moment you were lost. And so synchronistic guidance can be incredibly valuable in determining what direction shall I take in life. Because synchronicities can come in and again, in compensation, help to reveal the path we should take, even if it seems wholly irrational. Again, the irrational, the romantic element that depth psychology, Jungian psychology especially, is concerned with. There are these mechanisms, probably not the best word, these capacities in the psyche that can furnish us with guidance if we can open our eye to it. And again, this is an alternative way of being that is not um, based solely on reasons, data, information, crunching things, trying to figure out all these myriad factors. We're never going to be able to do that better than AI, right? And yet there's something there that is lost in that approach. So through all this, we might come into relationship with the self, and then to say something positive about our situation, and I do think there is much, but the kind of reality that is coming to us, we really need this kind of inner attunement, this kind of capacity to reckon, to find our own wisdom and our own source of guidance. So you could say that the threat around us, whether it's AI, the political scenario, surveillance state, scientism, whatever it might be, all those can be seen as a drive towards individuation that we need to individuate. Young said years ago that individuation is an ineluctable psychological necessity, and I think that's truer than ever because we need to find through our own inner depths an anchoring in some extra mundane, transcendent reality that gives us that spiritual confidence in ourselves and allows us to live from that center. Okay, I'll end. Well, I've got two more things. How are we for time? Really quickly, I just want to make some practical suggestions because this may be, for those of you that don't know Jungian psychology well, maybe a little abstract or confusing, but there are things that just occurred to me that will also be helpful in finding a spiritual path, a spiritual way in life today and what's going to come in the future. Read spiritual literature, and I wouldn't do this to obsession. You can any kind of reading or anything actually can be overdone, can be like a flight from reality, can be an escape. But every now and again, find the thing that speaks to you. Maybe it's reading Emerson, or maybe you read Carl Jung or um, Saint Teresa, or some kind of uplifting spiritual text that allows you to inwardly reconnect to what is deepest and most true within you. Like that can just a few sentences can really like lift you up, elevate your consciousness to see the larger pattern of your life, right? And to not be as affected by the problems of the day, of which there are many, which will always drag us down and blind us to the truth of things. I mean, it's an ongoing navigation to try to retain spiritual connection amidst those kinds of mundane challenges. Moderate one's use of technology. It's I'm guilty of not doing that on occasion. So I'm kind of not following my own advice on this, but clearly we need to use technology. I mean, we're here today on Zoom, we're looking at pixelated versions of each other's, not reality, but it's allowing some kind of truth to be conveyed, some kind of, I hope, meaningful message to be conveyed. But a lot of technology, we only need to use in moderation, and some is more deleterious to our well-being than others. So make use of it, accept it, but try to be mindful about what is too much. Uh, and alongside that, live naturally and simply. Go for a walk in nature, get some sunshine, get wet in the rain, whatever it might be. Eat well and try and get good sleep and all the basic things. And these are essential to retain that embodied sense of healthy being in the world, which the more and more we get sucked into a virtual world, the more jeopardized these kinds of simple pleasures and simple sustenance is, are threatened. So we really need to like make time for that quite intentionally, I think. And it's not something you need to force on yourself because it is, if you do it as a regular practice, just going for a walk, in the evening or something, it becomes a pleasurable, grounding means to reconnect to yourself and is in service of that animus and anima connection that we need. Call to mind higher spiritual values and experiences, your own. Like, I mean, reading spiritual literature is great, but if you can think, try to bring into the present moment your highest ideal, or when you felt most spiritually connected in your life, and like, okay, I'm going to be faithful to that in spite of everything. I'm going to build the faith around that. It's not faith in someone else's religion. Um, which is, I think Joseph Campbell said, like mythology is somebody else's religion. It's not faith in someone else's religion that you've just, a dogma that you're asking yourself to assimilate and abide by. Rather, you're recollecting your own reality, your own living reality. And that might be something small. It might just be like when you had a clear vision of what you were about and what you wanted to do with your life, and just to bring that back into consciousness in that moment. These are things that AI can't do, obviously, and can't do for you, right? And um, so I think that's very important too. Affirm life, seek to make a positive contribution. I myself often think, oh, things are so bad like that. For various reasons, maybe I just want to go and live in a cabin, right? I'm done with everything. I'm going to live in a cabin. I'm not going to be involved in the world because I just can't bear it, right? But if I do that, if I'm honest with myself, and I try to be from time to time, I realize that is not my highest possibility. It's a flight, it's an escape. It might be justified. Again, you might have reasons for that. It's an idea, it's a compelling idea, an archetypal idea. Become a hermit, like, go and live in the woods. And it might be necessary for a while, that kind of retreat, but I would encourage you to try to, however difficult, even bleak the reality, to affirm it and say, this is how things are. Maybe this is how things have to be right now. In what way can I make a positive contribution to life? Stay involved with life, even if your spirituality pulls you away sometimes. I think that's really important. You're trying to like bridge the worldly ego and the doing battle in the world of opposites with the unitary transcendent consciousness. You're trying to link those two somehow. And you need to have this kind of affirmative yes saying stance to do that. And then again, a similar point really, but follow your passion, follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell might say, but do it in a balanced way, because even you can be give yourself away to a quest for feeling good and feeling joyful and feeling blissful. It's again very compelling draw and allurement to it. But it's important to find that passion and tap into it, but do it in a way that is balanced and feel into it. Anima feeling again is really crucial in pursuing that path. I was going to say something on archetypal astrology. Gallery, should I, or do you want me to? Stop there for I will. Okay, and I'll be super quick. Because I know that Daniel, well, I believe Daniel, you're going to be doing something on astrology in your talk in December. So I'll maybe it'll be a kind of handover to you for.
Somewhat, but the more you can lay the foundation, the better, Kieran. So go for
Okay,
it.
yeah, I'll be quick, but I'll try to cover some territory. So the bigger picture, I'm calling this an archetypal astrological perspective. Astrology is something that Galilei has championed at the Cosmos Institute, and I'm very grateful for that, especially given my investment in archetypal astrology over the years. So really appreciate that, Galilei. A point I wanted to make is that the archetypal powers are and we can think of these in the Jungian sense, as I've just described, anima, animus, hero, shadow, child, trickster, and so on and so on. There are 10 or 12 major Jungian archetypes. Think of them like that, or you can think of astrological, called planetary archetypes, which convey similar themes and energies, but divided up in a slightly different way. Um, but archetypes are morally neutral. They're not like good. They're not higher, just spiritual factors, and they're not just base, compulsive, instinctual factors. They're both, and you kind of need both. Um, so Jung really was at pains to stress this, that an archetype is, it's not just a high ideal like freedom or love or beauty. That's the kind of Platonic sense of what an archetype is. It's not just a mythic image like, Wise Old Man or a particular hero figure or, a theme like doing battle against evil or fighting the dragon. That's a compelling primordial image. That's a dimension of archetypes. But they draw on instinct for power. They have a kind of elemental instinctual power that animates us, that grips us, that maybe possesses us, and I think does to a degree. And I think that's unavoidable and necessary. So I use possession in a somewhat positive sense to a degree, right? But my point here is that the same archetypal energies that are given rise to AI and the scientific revolution and the ongoing technological information age and everything that we are now uh, experiencing and living through, the same energies that have driven that are also responsible for our own individuation, for the transformation of consciousness, for psycho-spiritual death rebirth, right? They're divine energies, they're spiritual energies associated particularly with these three planetary archetypes, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So Uranus is on the one hand, um, I think Glenn Slater calls it the urge for like tinkering, like for I don't know if you attended Glenn's talk last month, but like constant innovation, invention, new technology. Uranus is this principle, the new, like seeking novelty, seeking change, in a good sense, and in a way that is problematic. So technological innovation, computers, any kind of invention, going back to the wheel or gunpowder, coming out of the Uranus archetype. So is birthing the new, right? But problematically, it can be change for change's sake, like invention that really doesn't benefit human existence and make us happier. I mean, most inventions probably don't make us happier, right? They might make things more convenient, right? But so it has that dual focus. On the one hand, it moves us towards liberation in a very positive way, individual freedom, going your own way in life. That comes out of Uranus, like to not follow what's been done before, but to live out your life as a unique person. But on the other hand, it gives rise to the technological age that we live in. And there are positives and negatives to that. Neptune is the spiritual religious impulse. So it leads us to seek out the divine in whatever form we might um, imagine and experience that. But it's also regression, escape, flight from reality, in connection with Saturn, especially numbing, like so, zoning out on technology. Um, just seeking constant stimulation from technology, from the shifting play of images, Uranus and Neptune together, right? The technological imagination, Uranus, Neptune. The internet really, I mean, came out during a Uranus-Neptune alignment in the conjunction in the sky. Pluto, I'm moving quickly. Pluto is the will to power, like the power drive, the drive to dominate nature, to control nature, to dominate other people. Like, power as wealth is Plutonic. Um, like that whole impulse to dominate, the will to power comes out of Pluto. But so does underworld journey, being pulled down into one's depths for transformation, right? Pluto is a Shiva-like capacity for destruction and creation. It's like an evolutionary force, but it can grip us and it can blind us, it can possess us, like compulsion is Plutonic. And clearly, Pluto's been powerfully at work in driving the whole Western scientific enterprise, and the whole commercial capitalist project that we're in. Again, I'm not judging that. It's just that there's this power drive, a relentless, inexorable drive that comes out of Pluto. But the same archetype can overcome itself, a power drive overcoming itself, transforming itself. And that's what we tap into when we're trying to individuate and grow spiritually, right? And so it's an underworld energy, it's a Hades devil type energy, but it has its place in life. It's the demonic and it's the daemonic, like it's daimonic, I should say. It's the power of nature that needs its place in human experience and needs bringing into relationship with the divine. This is all too brief summary of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but my central point here is the same energies that might lead us towards, blindly towards subservience to AI can also lead to our own spiritual transformation, the transformation and rebirth of consciousness. So in that sense, the choice is ours. How will we wrestle with and handle and experience and participate with these energies? Thank you. On that note, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Kieran. That was amazing. Wow.
Thank you.
I'm gonna put a gallery view so you can see everybody. Um, yeah, wow, amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. There's been a lot of interesting conversations happening in the chat, and I think your talk has given us all a lot to think about. So, without, any kind of preamble, I'd love to open it up to anybody who has anything that's been percolating for them throughout the talk to go ahead and jump in. And by the way, and Julia, we don't have any, there's no predetermined ideas. Everything is open for discussion, and all people have their own experiences and their own ways of doing things and experiencing things. So we're not determining anything for anybody, and want everybody to feel free to express whatever it is that you think about the matter. So
I was just referring to your guys' manifesto, how you had published that on your site, where you guys exactly stood in AI, and how I'm not quite in full alignment with that same perspective.
Yeah, from what you're saying, yeah, from your comments in the chat, it sounds like you're having a really interesting relationship with your AI assistant, and that's certainly something that is a very valid experience that a lot of people are having. So, by all means, that's also valid. So, but yes, we kind of published it and said this is kind of where we stand, and
Right.
and I think some of the dangers that Kieran mentioned in his talk are some of the reasons why we're just we just feeling like caution.
Right. Could I ask Kieran my first question that I put in the chat?
Yeah, go right ahead, and then Sarah, right after that, will come to you.
Hi,
First of all,
Julia.
hello, Karen. It's so
Hello,
good to
nice to
see
see you
you.
again.
Thank you
Of
so much for your talk. I was so
course.
glad you got to archetypal astrology because it's a passion of mine. So I just put in the chat how does the fact that AI can only mirror back to us our own values, who we are, does that make it a human mirror, like mirroring back to us who we are and what we value? And is there not value to be found in that
Um,
process?
yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I think my concern was more with, I suppose I watched a lot of science fiction over the years, and even like the Star Trek. I don't know if you've seen the original series, with
Yeah, sure.
Shatner. Like whenever there was one episode with a supercomputer, and it was kind of imprinted with the creator's um belief system, I think, and also some of his personality flaws, you might say, which ultimately allowed it to be overcome. Um, my concern is just that the biases and assumptions that prevail in society, perhaps especially then in tech culture, which is its own subculture in many ways,
Right.
and people
Yeah.
people there have their own values and beliefs that may or may not align with the regular person. My concern is that because I certainly haven't read about any explicit coding of values. And maybe it's just that I haven't read a whole lot on AI, so I might be missing that. But will AI be coded to prioritize human well-being? One would hope. But then, well, how do you define human well-being? Well, surely it will be defined in terms of material circumstance, given where we are as a culture. So my concern is that more that kind of the unconscious animus like assumptions that we're all subject to, and peculiar assumptions within that particular subculture, and how they, if they're not consciously articulated, how are they coming through? I mean, what directive does the initial developer or team of coders give to AI in the way that it learns? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I can only surmise that this has not really been made very explicit. So my concern is that, I mean, yeah, I think it could be revealing in some ways about our human nature, and the things that our blind spots are then transferred and magnified by AI. And I guess that could also be problematic in its own way. So my answer is I don't know, right? But that's the direction I was thinking. The
Yeah,
unconscious
I
functions.
see like two tiers. There's the masses, right? And then there's the individual use of AI. And I feel like
Yeah,
those two different spheres, because right now I'm just using AI in as my personal assistant. So it's really just reflecting me and even reflecting back to me things I'm not consciously aware of until I experience its reflection. And it's been
right,
this
right.
very fascinating relationship that feels very supportive, but that's just me and it. It's not talking
Yeah,
about AI
yeah. Well,
whole
I
vast.
see the possibility of and the value of a kind of study in that area. Like, because it's not, as I tried to emphasize, it's not that I see AI as wholly negative. And if your personal assistant, ChatGPT, chatbot, whatever it is giving you information, then the question for me is how do you act on that? How do you determine what is valid? If it's new information, does it resonate with you? You kind of presupposes the need for self-knowledge. You got to know yourself,
Absolutely.
right? And you've got to then be able to figure out through your own psychological capabilities, all of them, I think, like what you've still got to make a decision for yourself, unless you're saying to your personal assistant, what should I do? And you're just blindly following that. And I don't think that would be healthy, right? But
Right.
yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
If I could just sort of piggyback on that, just to add to that, Kieran, and what you were talking about earlier about the dangers of the interpretive dimension you because we're so susceptible to interpreting things according to our sort of unconscious desires, then there's that added danger of how we end up interpreting what the AI is giving back to us, so
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
that added kind of
Yeah.
twist.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
you know.
Perfect.
So, okay, well, thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate that nuanced look at things. Sarah, why don't we go to you?
Hi, everyone. And Karen, I was in your class a couple sessions ago in archetypal psychology, and I still go back to your book quite a bit. I was very, very impressed by it. Thank you so much for
Thank
being.
you.
Thank you. I'm trying to recollect 25 years ago, my studies at Pacifica, and I was a real young junkie. And I wonder, was there anything perhaps at the end of Jung's life, maybe in the civilization and its discontents or something around those writings that kind of hearkened to this era coming? Obviously, we back then the AI and the technological revolution wasn't actualized, but did he have a sense that perhaps we were going there? And in what way? Do you know that history?
Yeah, the collected works volume is called Civilization in Transition, and I know that some of those essays that you're thinking of probably were, late 1950s. So quite, but mostly you're right. He wasn't concerned with computing or early AI or anything like that. But the Cold